Hey there, welcome back to the 5G Guys podcast. I'm Dan McVaugh, and normally I would have my co-host Wayne Smith with me, but due to each of us having some extensive travel schedules, we have not been able to marry our schedules up to record our episodes. So I'm going to go solo this week on this episode. I look forward to having Wayne back at the mic with me in the next episode. But today we are going to talk about the relationship and the competitiveness between U.S. cable service providers and cellular providers, more specifically the cable providers' broadband internet services and how those services are being leveraged for cellular, and conversely how they're also leveraging the cellular networks and their services and vice versa. So it's a very interesting relationship, partnership, if you will, at times. Today, I'm going to really focus on what I call and others call the telco top five. So it's really the five largest U.S. telecom companies who really are at the center of this competitive, cooperative relationship. And those five companies are AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon on the cellular front. Those companies constitute about 98% of every cellular subscriber in the U.S. So, that really is where the cellular part of the market lies. And then the other two players in this top five band of largest telecom operators in the U.S. would be cable operators Comcast, who brands their services as Xfinity, and then Charter, who's branding their services as Spectrum. So that's what we call the telco top five. Why do we call them the top five? It's simply just because those five companies have the largest total market cap value in the United States based on their stock prices and total value accordingly. So to kind of put that into context, the telco top five at the time of this recording was worth roughly about $630 billion in the U.S. So that's the value of those top five companies. And to put that into perspective, if we look at overall technology companies and what I'll call the Fab Five, the five largest generally technology-based companies in the U.S., that being Apple, Alphabet, who's the parent company of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta, also the parent company of Facebook. Their market cap value is massive in comparison. They're at $8.8 trillion, so literally 14 times the size, more or less, value in the telco top five than the top five largest U.S. telecom providers that we're going to talk about today. So it's kind of an interesting fact just to even think about as we talk about this today. And I think one big thing that jumps out to me when I think about the differences between the telco top five and the overall technology Fab Five is when you look at that telco top five, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, Comcast, and Charter, these guys are playing in a fiercely competitive space. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how that competitiveness is kind of working its way into the relationships these companies have with each other, because not only are they competitors, but they're dependent on each other to provide a lot of the services they're providing to their customers. You look at the telco top five, and Apple's alone on its own there as a device and content company. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Facebook. These gargantuan companies just don't compete as directly with each other and as fiercely with each other, and they can kind of stand on their own in their specific markets on what they claim to fame to be. Now, obviously, like Amazon has Amazon Web Services for server hosting, that, and Microsoft competes directly with them with Azure. So they're not completely independent of each other in terms of competitive overlap, but nothing quite as competitive as the telco top five. So let's dive into a little bit about what this really means in terms of this sort of incestuous overlap of codependency and competitiveness that exists between the telco top five. On the front end of it started by the fact that you're seeing these cable companies, Xfinity, Spectrum, aka Comcast, Charter, they are packaging mobile phone service to their customers as part of their bundles. So, of course, we all know that we can get linear television cable service from them for entertainment. We can get broadband internet service from them through cable modems. to provide internet to our homes and businesses. And they're also now packaging mobile cell phone service to their customers. And the way they're doing this is through what's called a mobile virtual network operator, MVNO. And what that is they are basically the marketing company selling the service, but they don't actually own the networks that are providing that cellular service to their customers. That network is actually owned and operated by one of the three big cellular companies. If you want to get a little more insight into how this works and the dynamics of it, we did an episode, I think it was episode 28. We called it MVNO 101. So go check that episode out. It's a good primer and explanation of how this MVNO network works. But really what it means is Comcast and Charter, they're providing customer service. They have the point of presence for you to buy your cell phone service through a retail store or through their website. But at the end of the day, they aren't actually operating the networks that are providing that cellular service. And in fact, in both Comcast and Charter's case, they are using Verizon's network. So if you're a Comcast Xfinity or Charter Spectrum mobile customer, you are actually using Verizon's network to do everything with your mobile phone when you're on a mobile phone network. Hey, real quick, a quick word of thanks to today's sponsor, Vertex Innovations. For over 17 years, Vertex has been building the nation's wireless and broadband networks. Providing project management, network engineering, and construction oversight are just some of the ways Vertex helps their clients. So if you're looking for more of a partner to help you with your wireless network designs, construction, implementation, or operations, reach out to Vertex. You can find them at vertex-us.com. So that's kind of the beginning of this sort of relationship between each other. Yet they sell their services as competitive to Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile. So that's kind of the scratching the surface of it. Now, what's interesting about that is that these cable companies, while they are reselling service on these networks from Verizon, they are working as diligently as possible to actually provide that mobile phone service to their customers without depending on Verizon's network as much as possible. So, when you're at home, you will most likely be using your Wi-Fi network that's over your cable modem broadband service to activate and use your mobile phone service when at home. When you're on the go at a coffee shop, at other public locations like airports, you may also be using a Wi-Fi network versus a cellular network, and so on. And as a matter of fact, Charter actually has reported that when they look at their MVNO customers' mobile cell phone use, they actually have reported publicly that they claim that they're only using Verizon's network about 13% of the time that they're on their mobile device. The other 25% of the time, Charter reports that those customers are using Wi-Fi at their place of work, 43% of the time using Wi-Fi at home, and 20% of the time using other public or private Wi-Fi networks, private meaning the Charter network of Wi-Fi throughout the U.S. In addition, Comcast, Xfinity doesn't report on these sort of statistics, or I haven't seen anything, but what is interesting is that Charter and Comcast actually have an agreement to allow each other's customers to effectively use the Wi-Fi networks of each other's networks. So a Xfinity mobile user can use not just the Xfinity network of Wi-Fi hotspots around the country, they can also use the Charter network of Wi-Fi hotspots and vice versa. So this is an even more interesting sort of incestuous spiderweb, if you will, in this competitive landscape, because these cable companies, Charter and Comcast, are really competitors with each other, but yet they are working together synergistically to allow each other's customers to, as much as possible, not use Verizon's network as part of their MVNO agreement with Verizon. So that's a very interesting dynamic in this relationship between the cellular carriers and the cable companies. Now, if we flip this situation on its head and look at the relationship between these companies in the other direction, we will see that cellular companies such as AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon actually depend on Comcast and Charter and other companies for their broadband networks as a method by which they are providing the backhaul for their 4G and 5G cellular traffic. So if you have listened to prior episodes, or if not and would like to go back, we did a prior episode called Wireless Needs Wires. And I'll see if I can remember, I think that was episode 23. And we talk about the fact that all of these cell sites actually ultimately need a wire, and more specifically fiber optic networks, to backhaul all of that large amount of 5G and 4G and other traffic back into the public telephone network, into the public internet network, and so on. So AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile actually pay Comcast, Charter, and other cable companies, among others, to have fiber to their cell sites to backhaul all of that traffic. And so now you can see that this codependency between all of these guys is really bidirectional, and it's an interesting relationship. In addition, competitively, those same 4G and 5G cell sites, specifically for T-Mobile and Verizon, are also being used by both T-Mobile and Verizon to provide what's called fixed wireless access. And what this is it's residential broadband internet service that competes directly with these cable companies for your home broadband internet services. And they are actually stealing customers away from these cable companies using fixed wireless access, which is just an extension of their cellular networks, so that they can compete directly. And to give you some numbers to the extent by which this is actually happening, it's not huge. T-Mobile at last report publicly claimed roughly 3.2 million fixed wireless access customers, so folks that might have been on a cable provider for their internet service but are now using T-Mobile 4G or 5G. And Verizon sitting at about 1.9 million fixed wireless access customers at last report. So not huge numbers, but it's just kind of ironic that many of those cell sites providing that fixed wireless access might actually be using a fiber internet connection from that same cable company that they're competing with by stealing those broadband customers away. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this, though, is that the cable companies are actually making moves, and the cellular companies are making moves to prevent or reduce the extent by which they're dependent on each other. And specifically, I'll talk a little bit about what they're doing. So in the case of the cable companies, many of these cable companies, including Charter and Comcast, as well as Cable One, Cox, Mediacom, and other cable companies, they actually in 2021 participated in spectrum auctions with the FCC to purchase spectrum that would allow them to provide cellular service. And this particular spectrum band is called CBRS, Citizens Broadband Radio Service. And it's a chunk of spectrum that would allow these companies, as well as other private companies and entities, to provide private wireless networks that can be used as an alternative to traditional cellular networks. These cable companies collectively spent about just under $1.2 billion for about 2,900 licenses around the country. These licenses cover over 1,000 counties. And so what has started happening is, in the case of both Charter and Comcast, is they have actually started building small cell networks, private wireless networks, using this spectrum as a way for their customers' mobile services to be served by their own cell sites using CBRS spectrum, and again, therefore not being required to use Verizon's network to provide that mobile service. Now, these have not been done extensively, to my knowledge, or any public-facing information in terms of actual network announced launches. But in both cases, they have confirmed that they are doing trials, and they're doing this by leveraging their cable plant out in the network, specifically their cable plant that's aerial, that's on telephone poles, to hang small cells off of that cable to provide signal, that CBRS signal that would not require the mobile user, that when they're in distance of that and able to be served by that cable plant, to not have to use Verizon's cellular network. So they are making moves and spending a lot of money on those moves to try to avoid the need for an MVNO relationship with Verizon. How that's going to shake out will be interesting to watch, and it's something we'll keep an eye on and report. But so that's an interesting example of what the cable companies are doing to try to eliminate the dependency on their cellular partners, in this case Verizon, and their MVNO contract. Now, conversely, the cellular guys are also making a lot of moves to avoid dependency on the cable guys' fiber networks and not have to purchase fiber interconnectivity for service of backhaul for their 4G and 5G traffic from their cell sites. Specifically, this would be AT&T and Verizon that are playing in this space. In both cases, they have both been building out extensive fiber networks around the country, and is evidenced by the fact that they actually report publicly on number of homes passed that they pass with fiber. So AT&T has reported, of their last public reporting that I've seen, that they pass about 30 million homes, which is about 20% of the homes in the United States. And Verizon plans by the end of this year, 2023, to have passed 18 million homes with fiber, which constitutes about 13% of the homes in the United States. Now, to compare that to the cable companies across the board cover about 60% or more of the homes with fiber, either directly or to the neighborhood. So that kind of gives you a sense for where Verizon, AT&T are stepping on the toes of the cable guys to compete directly with them for fiber-based home internet service. But that same fiber that AT&T and Verizon are deploying is also allowing them to provide fiber connectivity to their own cell sites as well, to avoid having to pay for fiber backhaul to somebody else, whether that be cable companies or other companies like local phone companies like Lumen or what have you. Now, we don't have any public numbers, or I have not seen any public numbers on percentage of cell sites by which AT&T and Verizon are providing their own fiber backhaul. But these are very extensive and very expensive initiatives that these carriers have taken on to build those fiber networks. So much more expensive than the roughly $2 billion that the cable companies have spent on spectrum. AT&T and Verizon have spent tens of billions of dollars on their own fiber networks. So again, this kind of gives you a sense for the massive capital spend that all of these top 5 telco companies are spending on a recurring basis, year in, year out, to build their networks, and in many cases do so in a way to compete with each other, but also in some cases strengthen the dependency that the other guys have on each other. So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's one that is fascinating to track, and it'll be interesting to see how that continues to shake out. It'll be interesting to see how much T-Mobile and Verizon's fixed wireless access customer growth grows. It'll be interesting to see how much Comcast and Charter's MVNO cellular customer growth grows, which, by the way, I think I failed to say earlier. Charter reports roughly 6 million customer lines of cellular customers that are Charter cellular customers through that MVNO relationship, and Comcast is very close behind them with 5.3 million subscribers. So again, these are fractions of the subscriber base the cellular carriers have themselves, but it does give you a good sense for the areas in which these companies are competing and depending on each other. So very interesting thing to look at. As always, would love to hear feedback from any of our listeners. If you have thoughts, questions, different perspectives on this, you guys all have some different experiences sometimes that maybe Wayne and I don't see. So look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions, comments, as always. And thanks for letting me run solo this episode. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody and talking with you in the next few episodes. Thanks. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guys. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.